Right now, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker all the way from Wisconsin. I don't know if he's a Green Bay fan, but you can ask him. Gary Biller's with the National Motorists Association, and we're going to give him 35 minutes, so ignore the time on the sheet and just take your time there. Please welcome Gary.
Thank you. And yes, I'm a Green Bay fan, and it was sweet to see Seattle lose the way they did. I'm sorry, I have to admit that. I want to thank Ronnie and the Speakers Committee for inviting me here tonight. I guess it was a safe bet to invite somebody from Wisconsin to come to the early February meeting, but I appreciate being here. And when Lynn Patino and I started talking about my appearance here several months ago, I was immediately looking forward to being here for a couple of reasons. One is, I know because you're here as individuals and as a group, you're engaged in the issues. And the other reason is, I will get into in just a few minutes, is here in Lehigh Valley, we are near the epicenter of a very critical area in the United States for motorist rights. And as Ronnie mentioned, I'm the president of the National Motorists Association, and let me see if we've got... Can everybody see that? It's a little bit dim, but hopefully it's better to look at that than look at me. What I want to talk about tonight is when we turn the other cheek and don't pay attention to the abuses that happen, and I know you've seen that in a lot of different areas. Tonight I'm going to be talking about drivers as second-class and double-taxed citizens. And when you look at the secondary title, and it's our own fault, that's not a lament, that's a call to action. And I'll explain that as I go along. There are 225 million licensed drivers in the United States. The National Motorists Association is the driver's rights organization for the U.S. And I have to tell you, we count our membership in the thousands, not the tens of thousands or the hundreds of thousands. And if we could only get one half of 1% of the nation's licensed drivers, not even just join my organization, but just take issue with things that are going on that I'm going to be covering here, we would have quite a voice both in Washington, D.C. and in the state capitals where a lot of the action is going on. Tonight I want to talk about three particular critical areas facing motorists. I'm going to get a sore neck before this is all done. The first is the increasingly invasive surveillance. We've seen that with the NSA. We're seeing it out on the streets more and more. Those of you who, and there's plenty of issues around, who have seen our special issue of Driving Freedoms, it's the NMA's member magazine. We dedicated this issue a year ago because the stories of what was happening during traffic stops, particularly with roadblocks and all kinds of enforcement actions, the stories, and I'll talk about a couple of them tonight, are just amazingly disturbing. And that's why I refer to this as a call to action. So I want to be talking about the surveillance and the fact that technology, there's a lot of good technology out there, but technology tends to outpace our legal protections, particularly in the surveillance area. We need to call a halt to that and get our legislators to pay more attention to what's going on. The second area I want to talk about is the money that's being collected from road users that is supposed to be taking care of our roads and our bridges. And in fact, as we know, it seems like annually that we're hearing that the Federal Highway Trust Fund is on the brink of insolvency, and yet we're collecting, this is a very conservative estimate, $110 billion a year directly from road users through a number of different revenue streams, which I'll talk about too. And yet, all we hear about is the Trust Fund for Highway Repair is broke. So I want to talk about that. And then lastly, and one that's near and dear to all of our hearts, is what's been happening to our basic constitutional rights in traffic court, but also on the streets. So let me start with the first piece. We'll try that again. Which is the surveillance, the invasive surveillance going on with motorists. I apologize. There we go. Cameras. Cameras everywhere. This particular symbol, I'm referring to red light and speed cameras. Here in Pennsylvania, it could be worse. Philadelphia obviously has a very lucrative, depending on how you define lucrative, red light camera program. I think Abington County, or excuse me, Township has a red light camera program. Pittsburgh is considering it. It's one area you should be happy that Pennsylvania is a little bit behind the times, because there are states that just take in unbelievable amounts of revenue from cameras. The good news is, and your neighboring state of New Jersey has shown that actions can be taken against cameras that are watching us all the time, that their 5-year pilot program for red light cameras basically wasn't renewed late last year just because of a lack of political will, mainly because the citizens were complaining about the flaws in the program. It does pay to raise your voice to these kinds of things. Anybody know what this is that I'm showing there?
Dim picture.
What's that?
A dim picture.
Yeah, well, sorry about that. And actually, I don't know if it can be focused a little bit better. If you could comment.
I think
this.
it's all right.
Plug-in?
Sorry?
Plug-in?
It is, yeah, the front lens, if you just rotate it. I don't know if that'll, yeah, it's a little bit better, thank you. That is an event data recorder, or euphemistically referred to as a black box. And about 90 to 95% of vehicles on the road today have these. You probably have one in your vehicle and don't know it. Most vehicle owners don't. And it might also surprise you to know that the first EDR, event data recorder, was put into a US-made vehicle over 20 years ago. Basically, it constantly records a lot of the operating information, speed, braking profile, does your ABS kick on, and if an event triggers, like an airbag goes off, then that data is stored and kept in storage in the box to be accessed later. The original intent was good, and it still is if it's held to that, which is experts for state safety technology could go and look at this data, reconstruct an accident, and improve vehicle safety technology. And as we know, over the last 20 years, our safety technology in cars and features has been tremendous. The problem is that this data exists, and 20 years after the fact, only 15 states out of the 50 have any laws on the books to protect the vehicle owner, the vehicle owner's right to own the data of this black box that they bought when they bought their vehicle. And I hate to tell you, but Pennsylvania is not one of those 15 states. So it's kind of a wide open question on who owns the data as this information is being recorded and stored, whether the insurance company can access it, whether law enforcement can access it. And this is an area that we're way behind the times, as I referenced up top, that our legal protections are far behind the advance of technology. Sorry, another fuzzy picture, but this is one that is a trend that's growing and very disturbing. It's probably related to a story you may have heard about within the last week or two. You're looking at a sheriff's vehicle with an array of cameras on the trunk, and in fact, if we had expanded this photograph, you'd probably see a similar array of cameras on the hood of the vehicle. These are tied to an automated license plate reading system. And the story I'm referring to is that just broke, the ACLU helped break it, is that, I guess starting in 2008, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, started running their own ALPR, or Automated License Plate Reading System, in a few southern states, ostensibly to control or to monitor drug trafficking. So they were scooping up, basically what the system does is it snaps photographs of license plates. It uploads the data and compares it against a number of databases. So when you get the license plate, you have the vehicle owner by association, you have the location and the time that the image was taken. So essentially it's a full-blown tracking device of where vehicles are in theory, where the vehicle owner is. The DEA, quite quietly, because nobody raised a fuss in 2008, and this is a story that broke last week, has expanded this program to more of a nationwide scooping up of license plate information and storing it and comparing it against databases. one of the problems with this technology, or any law enforcement that brings private contractors that are in it for profit, is it breeds corruption and abuse, and this is no exception. The largest private contractor today that basically runs vehicles on public roads, parking lots, and just scoops up as many license plate images as it can is Vigilant Solutions. And they boast that they capture 70 million images of license plates every month. Their database consists of well over 1 billion license plates at this point. And what they're doing is they're selling the information to whoever will buy it. Debt collectors, if somebody's late on their car payment, their auto insurance is expired, even the states get involved. If you didn't pay your state tax last year, this, you know, the Vigilant Solutions of the world sell the data, whoever will buy it. There is some shining light at the end of the tunnel, and that is that some states are introducing some legislation. This is one area where legislation is trying to keep pace. North Carolina is one of those states. The best legislation against, or at least controlling, ALPR technology has 3 pieces to it. The first piece is it limits to only a few select law enforcement agencies the ability to run ALPR systems within the state. Takes out of play the private for-profit contractors. The second piece is only certain databases can be checked with this data. And typically those include missing persons, outstanding warrants, and terrorist watch lists. I don't think any of us would have any problem with those. It's when you start going well beyond that. The third piece is, in the ideal legislation, is if there's no flag, when you capture the license plate information, upload it, and don't have any hits, that data is destroyed immediately. There's no reason to keep it as a record and look back on it weeks or months later. So that's an area where my organization is spending a lot of time encouraging and lobbying state legislators to put these kind of laws into place. Well, you recognize the cell phone, if you can see it. The larger item is, it's ugly and it's got an ugly title, Universal Forensics Extraction Device. And what that is, besides just a bunch of words, is it's a device that, when you hook it up with a short cable to a cell phone, within a few minutes, downloads every piece of information from that cell phone. Who you've been talking to, where you've been through GPS tracking, what your internet search habits are when you've used your phone, who your contacts are, what your text messages are. Where this becomes important is some years ago, the US Supreme Court made a ruling that when a suspect is taken into custody, that he or she can be bodily searched, their articles of clothing for the most part, and some routine items that might be in their pockets. And in fact, the Supreme Court mentioned specifically a pack of cigarettes as an example. That those articles can be searched, and if there's any evidence found, can be used against that person. Basically, it's a warrantless search. The California Supreme Court took that decision and upped it to an alarming level. Basically, the California Supreme Court said, we're going to take your pack of cigarettes and say that includes cell phones. So a suspect taken into custody, no warrant, if they have a cell phone on their person, can be hooked up to one of these devices, scoop up all of the information. As we know, a cell phone for a lot of people, not me, but a lot of people, it's like a portal to somebody's life. You know, you can kind of get their daily habits of what they're doing. And it's a gross imposition of privacy and rights. And flying above all of this, and this is becoming more popular too, we've all heard about drones and different purposes for drones. There are states and locations that are outfitting drones with cameras and using them for automated traffic control, kind of the eye in the sky. And if you've ever tried to appear in court and cross-examine a camera with the photo evidence to defend yourself or explain what's been going on, speaking of cameras, we get stories, we get emails across the country all day, every day, and it's not unusual to hear about, say, a funeral procession with a red light camera. It's escorted by local police, all the vehicles are waved through, and the camera keeps flashing them and issues all the tickets. And there's stories like that all the time. And so, you know, at least with a live officer, you know, some judgment can be used, and in a case with a camera, and then you're forced, there's no due process with cameras. So drones with cameras, actually there are some cities that are taking active interest against that and writing ordinances against using of drones. And the backdrop to all of this, as far as the mentality, this is from exactly a year ago, well, January of 2014, and the largest show in Las Vegas every year, the Consumer Electronics Show. This is a Ford vice president, and he said this in prepared comments. We have GPS in your car, and so we know what you're doing. The fact that he didn't expect any kind of adverse reaction, and there were thousands of people in this auditorium who immediately began murmuring discontent, saying, what the heck is going on here, took him by surprise, which tells you quite a bit. People don't like being spied on. And he followed up, not making the case a whole lot better, by saying, but we're not sharing that information with anybody. Well, that didn't make anybody feel any better. We've heard, you've probably heard the stories a couple of years ago about General Motors and their OnStar system. You know, that tracks subscribers 24/7 in their vehicles and provides all kinds of services. That some people unsubscribed to the service and found out months later the system was still tracking them everywhere. So there's this mentality in the automakers, we see it in the insurance industry also, of you know, surveillance is good, and the more we know about you, the more it benefits us. Now I want to talk about the piece about the money being collected from us directly. Let me talk about the revenue streams first. There's the gas tax at the pump. We pretty much know about that, don't really think about it a whole lot, maybe we do. My organization does, but the state and the federal governments both charge a tax per gallon. And that's okay if it's done properly and if the money's allocated properly. We think it's probably, nobody likes a tax, but it's probably the most equitable way to pay for our highway infrastructure, keep it maintained, and even expand it to take care of congestion problems and so forth. And that was the promise made to the public when the gas tax was first enacted. That's what the money was going to be dedicated for. So then we come to tolling, which ostensibly is kind of the same purpose, and that's one of my examples of double taxation. We were told that's what the gas tax was for, and now we're seeing more and more tolling going on across the country. There was one study that showed that a typical toll facility, and don't even get me started on electronic monitoring of tolling, but this study showed that 33% of all revenue collected at a typical toll facility is used to cover administrative costs and overhead, 33%. At least with the gas pump, that same study said it's closer to 1%. It's a pretty efficient process, not the way the money's spent, which I'm going to get into, but as far as how the money's collected. There are all kinds of surcharges and fees. Sometimes we're aware of them, sometimes we aren't. If you ever buy a new set of tires, if you ever buy a new battery for your vehicle, both of those are hit with excise taxes. We know about vehicle registration fees. We know about when you renew your driver's license. And when you think about 225 million licensed drivers, those things kind of add up to real money. More than 2 pounds of flesh, actually. And something that the National Motorists Association spends time daily on is traffic tickets. This is one area where the apathy of motorists is disturbing. We estimate that less than 5% of people who get traffic tickets show up in court to contest the ticket. And so the system, as I'm going to show you in the next slide, kind of overruns us. Unless we stand up for our rights, we're losing the battle. And I'll show you, I've broken a few rules here as far as PowerPoint etiquette by having too much information on a slide and probably print that's too small to see. But basically this is a traffic ticket that was sent to me 4 years ago by one of our California members. He got a ticket for a basic moving violation. I think it was an improper lane change. It was a $98 base fine. What he saw though was a $480 ticket. They basically, those 15 line items, which you may or may not be able to read, were all kinds of fees, taxes, and surcharges tacked onto that ticket to make it a $480 ticket. I mean, you see courthouse construction fee, funds, you see DNA ID funds, and on and on and on. And, you know, some of these are probably worthwhile programs. In fact, I'm sure they are. But why are they taking advantage of motorists who are just basically, okay, you know, I'm upset I got a ticket, I'm just going to send my money in and make it go away, and hopefully I don't get any points, getting zapped with all of these charges. I saw a ticket, not from California, just a couple weeks ago, where one of these line items said State Treasurer's Forensics Fund. I mean, what? Most states, and I'm not sure about Pennsylvania, most states, the markup on tickets is more like 2 to 3 times, which is still outrageous. Why the people in California aren't, they've been paying $500 tickets for years now. I just don't understand it.
They got some money.
Yeah, they move on to different things.
They don't have the money to fight the ticket.
Yeah, or the will. The $110 billion a year collected by or from road users is a conservative estimate. But this is kind of a general breakdown. You've got the money that's collected from the state and local governments, which is $77 billion a year. And keep in mind the Highway Trust Fund is going broke. Federal government through the gas tax is collecting 28, and I've seen that number as high as $34 billion a year. And traffic tickets, there is really no good estimate because there's thousands of jurisdictions issuing their own tickets across the country, and none of that information flows up to some central database. I believe that that number is anywhere between $4 and $7 billion, and I think it's probably closer to the upper number because of camera tickets, which have been proliferating. So we're not talking about chump change here. And unless we stand up and start challenging some of these charges and fees and tickets and the way tolls are being used or not used, one more item here, which maybe is the most disturbing of all. There was a report done a few years ago by the Tax Foundation that found that the Highway Trust Fund, the one that we keep talking about, is on the brink of insolvency. Through the political process, had 6,000 earmarks written against it. Some were transportation projects, but there were things like, this is back when there was the bridge to nowhere, graffiti removal on government buildings was taken from the Highway Trust Fund, renovating museums. I'm all for great museums, but why is the money being taken away from roads and bridges that we know are not being kept up properly? So I would say to you that the bigger problem, the collection system we need to be concerned about, but how the money is being allocated through the political process, as true with any political process, is disturbing, and we need to do something about it.
Rails to trails.
There you go.
Paying for all these trails for your house.
You know, it's just a bunch of boondoggle stuff to a large degree. It's just crazy. Many of you have seen this, and we've got plenty. If you haven't picked one up, my organization puts out a quarterly member magazine. A year ago, we saw so many stories of abuses to constitutional rights of motorists. And I'll tell you a couple stories from this magazine. Rather than spend a great deal of time on this, I'm going to give you some homework. Nobody likes homework, but I urge you to take, it's a complimentary issue, to take it home, read some of the stories. If you really want to get riled up, and you're probably already riled up on a lot of issues, this will do it. Try again. Yeah, I thought my thumb was broken for a second. You're going to find stories of guilt by body language, traffic stops where an officer, basically they just need probable cause to file a charge or to do a further search or seizure. And we're seeing more and more stories of that kind of a thing. I'm going to combine it. You know, you're probably looking at outrageous cavity search and thinking, when is this cavity search not outrageous? Well, there's a story, and I wish it were an isolated incident, but there was a New Mexico driver a few years ago. Routine traffic stop. It's kind of like the guy walked into a bar. I keep saying routine traffic stop, but routine traffic stop. The officer thought he was looking, the driver was looking kind of nervous, so he ordered him out of his car and said, "Can I do a bodily search of you?" The motorist said no, which you should never acquiesce to any kind of a search. You don't have to and you shouldn't. The officer then said he perceived that the motorist looked like he was clenching his buttocks. And then he called a judge and got a warrant roadside to do a bodily search of this fellow. Took him to a local hospital. There's still a punchline coming, by the way. Took him to a local hospital where the driver was subjected to a series of enemas. Nothing turned up. That doesn't sound good. He was then put under general anesthesia and given a full colonoscopy. Nothing was found. His lawsuit against that police department is still pending, and I hope he wins. But to add literally insult to injury, the hospital has to bill somebody. They sent the motorist a bill for several $1,000s for all these procedures. Casting about for probable cause, that's essentially what most roadblocks are. There's stories in the magazine in California and Georgia where the only legitimate roadblock in some states, not all states, is a DUI checkpoint. What's happening though at these checkpoints is the majority violation is people who are not wearing their seatbelt, or they find that their insurance is expired, and DUI is such a minor part of it. It's just an excuse to cast a wide net to look for violations. And as far as civil forfeitures, if you really want to get upset, read what we've got in there. And I mentioned this on a Bobby Gunther radio show last week. Go to YouTube and search on John Oliver civil forfeiture, and you'll find a 16-minute video segment, which is just, if you want to know, well, maybe you don't want to know, what's going on with civil forfeiture laws in this country, where the police basically can seize property on the roads and without filing any charges against the driver. Cash, the vehicle itself, way out of control. So I want to end this segment by reading you 54 words that are the most precise, powerful words I can think of. And every time I read them, I marvel. So bear with me if I can read these looking up. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched, I almost had that memorized, and the persons or things to be seized, the Fourth Amendment. We cannot forget this, and more important, we can't let our lawmakers forget or ignore it. Now I want to take a break and tell you a little bit more about my organization and what we stand for, what we advocate for. We're a membership-based advocacy organization. Basically 6 tenets, and I'm going to tell you what those tenets are and the real meaning behind them. The first one is traffic laws fairly written and reasonably enforced. Sounds reasonable. What we're really saying is drop the command and control tactics and treat motorists as responsible adults. More and more stories, including in this magazine, we're not being treated as responsible adults. Engineering, the 3 E's. Engineering, education, only then enforcement. That's something we preach. But when you talk to a lot of law enforcement agencies and the insurance industry, they forget the first 2 E's and really focus on enforcement. And I'm talking about improving highway safety and intersection safety. There's proven results by re-engineering intersections instead of just kind of hitting us over the forehead with a 2x4 and saying, okay, we're going to change your driving behavior by keep issuing tickets and penalizing you. That doesn't work. Full due process rights for motorists in the courts, on the streets, and in their vehicles. This one's really simple, if I can make it work. Follow the Constitution. This is the whole second-class citizen thing that was in the title of the presentation. We aren't second-class citizens just because we're on the roads or we're behind the wheel. Follow the Constitution. We should have the same. We have the same constitutional rights that anybody else does in any other setting in this country. Traffic penalties should be based on sensible standards that differentiate between responsible behavior and demonstrated unsafe behavior. Case in point, a Georgia driver, this is only a few weeks ago, was leaving a fast food restaurant and a cop started following him immediately. And this isn't necessarily the wisest thing, but the driver had one hand on the steering wheel and his other hand on his cheeseburger. Well, everybody's got a different tolerance for distraction, and what the officer was looking for, obviously, was any signs of irresponsible driving, putting the driver himself or anybody else on the roads in jeopardy. There was none of that, even admittedly by the officer. There was no weaving in his lane, there was no sudden braking or accelerating, and yet after a mile or two, the officer, I guess, got impatient, pulled the young driver over. He could have at least issued him a warning, or at most issued him a warning, but no, he issued him a ticket for distracted driving when there was no evidence of distracted driving. And I won't ask for a show of hands on how many of us have ever had anything to drink or eat while we were driving, but you're all here living, so I guess it worked out pretty well. Guilt by suspicion, that phrase keeps coming up more and more. You know, we are a constitutional republic, but I know you would agree we are veering way too far into a police state. And it's these kind of situations where the laws are being enforced without discretion. Again, it's the reason why I spend a lot of time, not just to recruit people to my organization. The membership due is only $35 a year. We don't get rich off of that. But what we do need is more people to join to add to our leverage and our power in going to congressmen and senators, state, federal, and demanding change to some of these things. Reasonable highway user fees, we've talked about this, so I'll move past this one pretty well, for maintaining our roads. It's fair to charge us for the upkeep of the roads. What isn't fair is to charge us both as general taxpayers for the same thing, fuel tax, tolls, and so forth, and it just piles up and we're being abused by that. Traffic safety based on sound engineering solutions, not arbitrary measures like speed traps and red light cameras. I mentioned this before. Anytime you bring profit and revenue into law enforcement, you're asking for abuse. And I guess the poster child for that, and there's a lot of them, is the city of Chicago. And who would have thought Chicago and corruption would go together? Chicago has the country's largest red light camera program. In fact, it may be, I think it's in the top 2 or 3 in the world. Hold on, I don't see any hats, but well, I see a couple. Hold on to your hats, but Chicago collects $70 million a year in red light camera revenue, ticket revenue. $70 million a year. That's not including speeding tickets, parking tickets, and everything on top of that. That's just red light camera tickets. And the whole thing blew up, although they're still running the cameras. The whole thing blew up when it was proven, and there were guilty pleas to the camera company at the time who had the contract was bribing city officials so that they would keep the contract. Very lucrative situation. And yet, and I'm from Madison, or the Madison area, not too that far from Chicago, and Illinois drivers just aren't up in arms, and why aren't they up in arms? $70 million a year for a corrupt system. Driver education, emphasizing, and who can argue against this, quality experience. Have any of you heard of graduated licensing programs? Graduated licensing is where young drivers, usually in the 16, 17, 18-year-old range, their driving rights are curtailed. They can't drive. Ronnie? Oh, I'm going to have to scoot along then. Anyway, what we're finding is when their driving rights are limited, you know, they can't drive past a certain time at night and they can't have more than a few passengers in the car, their accident and fatality rates go down. The problem is when you look at the same statistics for 19, 20, and 21-year-olds, the same statistics are going up a like amount. You're delaying their experience. We need better driving simulators and better quality education behind the wheel. I'm going to cut to the chase. I'm going to skip through a few here. Go to our website. This won't make you happy. I mentioned we're kind of at the epicenter to a critical area for motorist rights. We did a study a year ago and scored on a scale of 1 to 100, looking at 5 different categories: state fiscal responsibility, how they're spending our money on the roads, state imposed cost to drive, enforcement tactics, regulations, and legal protections. We rank every city. The District of Columbia is not a state. It came in a miserable 25 points out of 100. But if you go to our website, motorists.org, scroll to the bottom of the homepage, you're going to see this chart with the 8 names, and I'm going to go to that in a second, filled in. And you'll open up a spreadsheet, will tell you more about detail about the scoring for every state. 4 out of the 5 states that border eastern Pennsylvania make up the worst states in how they treat motorists. New York, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. And while you're laughing and saying, at least Pennsylvania's not there, if I had made this the 10 worst states, you know what's coming. Pennsylvania was tied for 9th with Georgia. Take a look at the details on the website, and you'll see a lot more about that. I'm going to skip to some action items, going back to these major issues of why aren't people getting involved. First, I want to show you quotes from 3 American philosophers, very different philosophers. Helen Keller. Never really thought of her as a philosopher. I have trouble. We may have found a cure for most evils, but we have found no remedy for the worst of them all, the apathy of human beings. Henry Rollins, he's a musician, spoken word artist, tattoo aficionado. People in America think democracy is a given. I think of it as an ecosystem, and what gets in the way of it is politicians and apathy. A double-barreled shot that was pretty accurate. And then you'll recognize my 3rd philosopher, Jesse Ventura. Government is at its worst when you have apathy from its citizens. We need to wake up. So let me give you 3 action items. Get involved. It's worked. New Jersey, I talked about the pilot program being shut down because the people just objected. Even more so, 32 out of 35 cities that had the opportunity over the last 20 years to say, we don't want cameras in our city, after they had cameras, overwhelmingly voted down the cameras when they were given the democratic right to say yay or nay. Demand government transparency. We have one of the most powerful tools that democracy can have, which is a public records request. And to aid you in that, to find out more what's going on behind the scenes, my organization put together a free 11-page guide on how to effectively write a public records request at the state or federal level. Links are provided. Just go to motorists.org/FOIA-guide, and it's there for you. And if you don't have time to write that down, just check with me later and I'll get you the information. And thirdly, another obvious one, I know you're all aware of this, but I'm going to change that a little bit or add to it by saying engage your local or state and federal representatives. They come back to their home districts, demand time. If you've got issues that are important to you, whether it's motorist related or not, spend time with them, personalize it, tell them your story, tell them why you want this change or why you support something, and they'll listen. And then, so just in summarizing the action items, maybe, I think that for us. Can you turn those lights down just a second, please? Because it's kind of, there we go. Thank you. I want to leave you with one thing as far as getting involved. Whether you decide to join my organization or not, that's certainly up to you. But when you pick up this magazine, in the middle there's a little pamphlet that explains a lot more about who we are, what we're about, and how to join. I put together a special discount code for you. It's already stickered into the pamphlet, and that's LVTP, go figure. I already mentioned the annual dues is only $35 a year, $60 for 2 years, $85 for 3. If you use the discount code, whether you call us in the toll-free number that's there, you fill in that panel and send it to us, or go online, there's a discount field, put in LVTP and you'll automatically get 20% off of those rates. So thank you for your attention, and again, get involved. We're getting run over as motorists. Thank you.
Where's Lynn Patnude?
Now, Gary comes from Wisconsin, which has even worse weather than Pennsylvania. Wisconsin has been in the news lately for several reasons. I understand they have a football team out there. Green Bay Packers. Came that close, except for the last 3 minutes. I kind of lost track. Who did win that Super Bowl, by the way?
Who lost it?
Never give up the microphone.
Yeah. Also, Gary comes from a state which is fighting the progressive movement that started there at the University of Wisconsin. And we have an up-and-coming politician, Scott Walker. So he's a guy to keep an eye on. On behalf of the Lehigh Valley Tea Party, we have a little going-away present for Gary. It's a T-shirt, custom sized and everything. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Without further delay, we have a presentation by Tom Campione, Creating Political Change. The gentlemen are going to be handing out flyers if they didn't do it already. Tom, we have just about 20 minutes that you requested. Does anyone have questions for Mr. Biller while we're waiting for Tom to come up? Hayden Phillips? Hold on a second, microphone.
I read in the Morning Call last week that Pennsylvania, across the nation, but Pennsylvania is going to start putting in rotaries, and it's the interchange without lights. They say it saves gasoline. You know, I spent years in New Jersey, and I always feared those, and now I'm thinking, are we going to go back to that? But they say it's different. Do you help us with that?
I will, and we call them roundabouts in the further in the Midwest, but they actually been installing quite a few in Wisconsin, and they're working rather well. The key is that they're not these small kind of traffic calming rotaries, but they're double lane. There's plenty of room for trucks and buses to get through and not get kind of stymied by them. They're better than four-way stops. They keep traffic moving. So in general, we're in favor of them if they're designed properly.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I know a lot of people here probably have a permit to carry, and in New Jersey they don't respect Pennsylvania's permit. But if you don't know, if you go to New Jersey, even if you follow the rules and put your gun in a locked thing and whatever, hollow point bullets are illegal in New Jersey. And they don't say that anywhere. There's no signs. And the fines are $1,000 per bullet, and you're charged with a felony. It's the only state in the country that does it. So if anyone doesn't know that, don't go over there with hollow points. With what? Hollow point bullets.
All this ramped up revenue, is this post-Obama, post-Obama manual, or has it been done through the Bushes and the Clintonistas?
I think it goes back to the time when the first motorized traffic began. When it's kind of like a crack addiction for administrators who want to fill budget. Traffic ticket revenue particularly is just something they get addicted to and just keep going on with it.
Or McCungy.
It's bipartisan, I guess is my answer to that, unfortunately. Sir. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing about the gas tax, they keep pushing us, the cars, to get better gas mileage. As we get better gas mileage, we use less gas, they get less revenue, and then they have to crank up the revenue again. And we're just sitting between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, one thing the federal government has done to kind of control things, which I won't say very often, is the federal gas tax has been held at 18.4 cents for over 20 years now. there's pressure to increase it, and the likelihood is they probably need to, but that's one area where they've held things.
I want to ask you, as far as the abuses against these motorists, it seemed inconceivable maybe a few years ago, but now you read anywhere from 5 to 20 years, they're going to have these self-driving cars. How will that affect the abuse of motorists? Have you given it any thought?
Yeah, and I don't know how to answer that question in a short fashion, but there's all kinds of liability questions on who's responsible if there's an accident. As of equal concern is, and there's a lot of things we're involved with on a V2V communications, that is, some of the safety features for driverless cars require cars to talk to each other through wireless networks. The question is what data is out there to be hacked and to be used by others. And there's a long way to go before we're a driverless car society. And I enjoy driving, so hopefully it's a long, long time in the future.